So I want to look, I, s- so let me just first say that really what I'm teaching is not my own. It's due to Rabbi Jeffrey Hoffman, this wonderful book that Rabbi Posner gifted to me called Weaving Prayer, an analytical and spiritual commentary on the Jewish prayer book. And this is to come back to Eliana and why it is in the world that I asked you to say that to create a major melody for Hashem Hashem Rachum V'Chanun. Um, I want to just look for a moment. You don't have to get it out, but on 323 in the Siddur, before the Torahs are taken out on Yom Tov, on the festivals, we chant the 13 attributes. We chant Adonai Adonai Rachum V'Chanun, and then there's like this prayer, and then we say Va'ani Tfilati, and then we take the Torah out. My first question to you is, what do you think about? What is your experience when we are doing that? Yeah, right. So like these verses, we typically we say them 3 times, and it feels a little bit like magic. We're going to look at some of where that comes from, right? Like an incantation. We're repeating words that, and by the way, the phrase begins Adonai, Adonai, so it has within it a certain repetition. So like we're trying to make something happen. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yeah. And by the way, I mentioned, I think at the family service and other times of the high holidays, very few Jewish prayers are in the singular person, right? So that instinct of like, yes, this is a personal lot. Most of our prayers are done in the plural. The vidui is done in the plural, right? But there's something very, very personal about this. By the way, it's a really good practice generally for prayer to, this is part of what can make prayer in the Jewish tradition feel less accessible because there's so many words. But I would say, like a really important skill in terms of the recitation of words of davening through the liturgy is allowing certain words to bubble up to you and to stay engaged with those words about what's going on with you and those words in that moment. Judy? Okay, so the melody for this, and I want to say it was jarring to me when I first got to this community, and I had to get used to the different melody. I'm now used to it, and it is also beautiful, and it also is moving to me. But for those of you who don't know, Eric Myers inherited a tradition, very authentic and good cantorial tradition where the melody for Adonai is Adonai Adonai Rachum V'Chanun, which is different from Adonai Adonai Rachum V'Chanun. I think that's in the same what do they call that? Mode. I think it's in the same mode. But the rest of the world that I know, right, does the second one. This is the only place in the world I know that does the first one. But yes, there's something very haunting about that melody. And in particular, I'm curious, sort of, what do you think is going on with that mode? I'd be curious to hear. Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're looking ahead. It's okay. It's all right. So now I want to walk you through, right, some of the sources on what's going on here, and why I asked Eliana to actually change the melody, which, how can you change the melody to those words? Judy, you weren't here, but when we took the Torahs out, I asked Eliana on the spot to do our third repetition of Adonai Adonai Erachim Echanun in a major melody as opposed to sort of the minor mode. So I want to first just look at why it is that it feels like we're asking for something or that this is like an incantation. Flip the page, right? Not to the title page, but to the other side. And I'm just giving you a passage from the Talmud Rosh Hashanah 17b, where if you read with me, it says at the top, the verse states, and the Lord passed by before him, being Moses, and proclaimed, right? So that's our verse, okay? And here's the tradition. Rabbi Yochanan said, were it not explicitly written in the verse, it would be impossible to say this, meaning we're about to say something that's like totally theologically inappropriate. The verse teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, wrapped himself in a prayer shawl like a prayer leader and showed Moses the structure of the order of the prayer. And here's the big line. He said to him, whenever the Jewish people sin, let them act before me in accordance with this order, okay, meaning wrap yourself in a prayer shawl and publicly recite Adonai, Adonai, Erachim V'Chanun, and I will forgive them, okay? So the rabbis had this tradition, and therefore, anytime you need forgiveness, this is the magic spell, right? Who said spell, right? Like incantation. This is the magic spell. This is the incantation. This is why basically the structure of slichot, of the entire slichot service, which is this whole thing leading up through the 10 days of repentance and leading up slichot before Rosh Hashanah and on Kol Nidrei. It's why we basically keep saying this passage over and over and over again, because we have a tradition that when the Jewish people chant these verses, that God will forgive us, right? And we're essentially saying, hey, God, you describe yourself as merciful, so you need to be merciful and forgive us for any mess that we may have made, okay? So that's and that's why we do it 3 times or 7 times, right? These numbers are not an accident. But that's the basic idea behind this. Harlan? Right. The rabbis do ask themselves the question, what is written in God's tefillin, right? What's written in God's tefillin as opposed to our tefillin have like the words of the Torah. What's written in God's tefillin? I don't have a good answer. I would love to know, right? Pick up the red phone and ask. For now, I'm going to now move on to what is going on with the festival service, but I guess I'm not going to. Yeah. Okay. So you're so theologically appropriate, Kay, right? Okay, we don't, of course, God can have a body and all these things. Maimonides he was just kidding, right? Judy. Okay, so now okay. So a couple of things, let me answer a couple of things. Look at the bottom of the top of the first page, okay? Bottom of the first page. And Judy, to answer your question, you have to do some rabbinic editing, okay? When we look at the verse itself, okay, I'm on the second page of the Hebrew. Va'ayavor Adonai al panav vayikra. Adonai el rachum v'chanun erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet noter chesed la'alafim noseh avon v'afesha b'chata'a v'nakeh. How does it continue? Lo yinakeh. V'nakeh lo yinakeh means the opposite of what we think it means. Okay, the meaning of this verse in its context, as it's translated here, is yet not remitting all punishment, but actually God visits the iniquity of parents upon children and upon children. In other words, I'm merciful to a certain extent, right? But then in the third and fourth generation, somebody's got to get it. Okay, so that's what the verse said. You're looking at me like that, Kay, like, oh, this is terrible. Okay, all right. Well, that's how I'm feeling. I read this and I say, oh my God, that's terrible. And that's why the rabbis cut it so we only say vinake, right? Which means that God does remit all punishment, and we excise that part, okay? Because the rabbis didn't like that. So the rabbis had no problem taking a verse and making it mean exactly the opposite of what it actually means in order to make it mean what they wanted it to mean, which is that God is merciful. Quite possible in terms of the history of when all that happened and why they were doing it and whatnot. Let me move us forward to two more texts. So to come back to, this is not what's happening with saying Hashem Hashem El Rachum Chanun, argues Rabbi Jeffrey Hoffman, and I think he's right, on the festival. So first of all, know that the process of saying this verse when we open the Torah, when we open the Ark on the festivals, it's only about 400 years old, which in Judaism is like not that old. It was 500. It's from Rabbi Arizal from the Isaac Luria. It's a Kabbalistic tradition. So it did not go back farther than that. So this is relatively new introduction into the liturgy. But if you go back, in case you don't have time, let me just review for you the context in Exodus. What's happened? Where are we? What had just happened? Cheta Egel. Okay, the golden calf. Okay, sin of the golden calf. We commit the sin of the golden calf. At the end of chapter 32, okay, Moses, if you remember, says, God, erase me from your book if you're not going to forgive this people. And God responds by saying, basically, okay, I forgive. Okay, God says, the people who have sinned, I'm going to erase from my record. In other words, they're going to be punished, but I'm not going to destroy the entire people on behalf of the people who sinned. Okay, so God has forgiven, but God says after that, go now, lead the people where I told you. See, my angel shall go before you. I'm going to send my angel. The people hear that God is going to send God's angel instead of God, and they actually go into mourning. They're sad because God is basically saying, I'm not going to be in your presence anymore. It's only going to be my angel. Moses then says, please, like, you got to be in my presence. And God seems to semi-relent and says, okay, and Moses says, I also, by the way, would like to, behold your presence. And God says, okay, I'm going to put you in a cleft in the rock, and I'm going to pass by. And this is where you can see it, the first source that I gave you. You cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. There's a place near me. Station yourself on the rock. As my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and shield you with my hand until I pass by. And then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. And then a few verses later, God passes by, and then we get these, and then we get Adonai Adonai Rachum B'Chanun. Right? So this verse seems to be, well, let me ask you, what does it seem to be? Right. So this is basically an impossibility, which is being in God's presence. Okay. So the verse, the chanting Adonai Adonai Erachum V'Chanun is impossible, quantum reality, or however we want to put it. But it's basically God saying, "Here's my presence, okay, and do the best you can. I'm going to protect you so you don't die, but here's my presence." Okay. Now flip the page to the final source on the page. Okay. In the book, in Masechet Yoma, the rabbis had a tradition, and I had never heard about this before, and I just think it's really cool, and that's basically the takeaway that I have from today. I don't have anything great homiletic. I just hope you enjoy this. Rav Katina said, this is in Yoma 54a, when the Jewish people would ascend for one of the pilgrimage festivals, the priests would roll up the curtain for them and show them the cherubs. Okay, where are the cherubs? They're on top of the Holy Ark. Okay, they used to be up there. Now they're in the right, which were clinging to one another and say to them, "See how you are beloved before God, like the love of a male and female." The two cherubs symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Jewish people. So when you went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, like, you know, you would bring your first fruits, you would bring your calf to be slaughtered, and you would, you know, go to eat, and you would, I don't know, you would, but part of your pilgrimage was going up to the temple. This is unbelievable to me, right? And the priests would do this. Right? I can feel you all want to get up right now. Like, Rabbi, what are you doing? The priest would open up the curtain to the Holy of Holies, and you would have a moment to sit there and behold the two cherubs, which you're not supposed to do, right? But apparently it was part of the experience of the festivals, right? Was having. And by the way, at the end of Kol Nidre in the main sanctuary, at the end of Ne'ilah in the main sanctuary, we put up talitot, and we give people the opportunity to go and stand in front of the ark and to offer our most sincere prayers, right? And I think that in the temple times, there was this opportunity to go in front of not the ark with Torahs in it, but the cherubs, right? Which is where God's voice is supposed to emerge from, and to stand there and behold God's presence. And we can't do that anymore. And so what do we do instead? We say, Adonai, Adonai, Erachum V'Chanun. We say this set of verses, right? Which is God's presence. Okay, this set of verses, which is God's presence, which is different from the plaintiff crying out. This set of verses is to evoke God's presence. If Jack Sasson were here, he would tell you that when you read in the Torah, and we'll read this at some point later on the holiday, a couple of times you read "Velo yera'u fanai rekam," that we should not see God's presence empty-handed. That is yera'u, or actually it's yera'eh in an earlier verse. That is a theologically cleaned up point vowelization of the word, because yera'eh can also be yir'eh. Okay? In other words, each person who goes on pilgrimage will see, not will have appear to you, but will actually see Pnei Adon. I think it's Pnei Adon. I'll find for you the verse, but will actually see God's presence, right? The Talmudic source that we have about standing in front and seeing the cherubs is actually based upon this idea that on pilgrimage, you would physically see, totally theologically inappropriate, but you would see God. And the way that you saw God was seeing the cherubs And now I'll read what Jeffrey Hoffman says. The opening of the ark in the synagogue during the Torah service and the three festivals was seen as a parallel to the opening of the ark on those same festivals in the ancient temple. But since the cherubs are missing in the synagogues, the chanting of the 13 attributes at that moment was understood as a substitute for beholding God's presence, just as it functioned for Moses, not related to a plea for mercy, which would be out of sync for the joy of these occasions. So that's why I said to Eliana, and actually, in his book, he says, Cantor Sandy Horowitz, who I don't know, but she's of New York City, both of us felt that since chanting the 13 attributes on the festivals reflects a different meaning from the chanting of the words on the days of awe, the melody used on festivals ought to mirror that as well. And she recommends maybe switch to a major key, right? So that you're not pleading for God's mercy on days of joy, right? But actually, you're sort of enjoying, wow, right? Like I get another day, right, to just sort of be in God's presence. Prisha? Tell me what you mean by a difference, because I'm happy to say yes. But what would the difference be? I mean, theologically, if I want to be appropriate, I would say, well, of course, it's not, essence, it's just presence, right? But if I go back to the sources, right, this is actually quite visual, right? And the verses, again, when we say Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'Chanun, the verses are actually a substitute for something visual. And what I want to say is that we're opening up the ark, right? We actually are still doing something quite visual, right? When we say these verses, we're opening up the ark. I don't want Musaf to go too late, so I'm going to move us forward in a second. But two more quick thoughts. I don't know that it's a typo. It's just a different translation, right? Different translation. Judy? So short version is to a great extent. I would also say I believe that in Deuteronomy there's also a similar verse that says lo yumtu banim al avonot avihem or something like that, that children shall not die because of this. So it's later Deuteronomy and also Ezekiel. And that's why, right, the rabbis, when they discover a problematic verse, right, the way that they make these cuts and these changes, but part of the way that they do that is by putting Torah against Torah and by putting prophets against, taking other verses and saying that, that's why.